and welcome. I am Humphrey Hawksley. This is Care Vision's professional talks and podcast, where specialist peer groups discuss issues on health and social care that are critical to all our lives. And the talks bit refers to the communication element. How do professionals talk to each other? And then how do they talk to civilians like myself in a language that I understand? Today's professional talk is on therapeutic childcare, how we can ensure that an emotionally injured child does not fall through the gaps as they move on to adulthood. My guest is very special in that for more than a quarter of a century, he worked in one particular community where he could track progress, pioneer trends, and deeply understand the challenges. What are the signs of a troubled child? And when spotted, how does a professional navigate a way forward? Please put your comments, your ideas, your arguments into the chat as we go ahead. And let's talk about all of this and welcome John Whitwell to Care Vision's Professional Talks.
Hello, and thank you. Pleased to be here.
Hello. John, are you in the Cotswolds at the moment where you spent so much time?
Yes, I'm in a village called Somerford Caves, which is actually just down the road from where the Cotswold Community was previously sited.
Ah, okay. So you're on home turf. Now, you say that you graduated in 1969, which is quite a time ago, and you went straight into this area of work. Now, as a young man, why was that?
Well, there are several answers to that question. On the superficial answer is I needed a job, a living job, which provided me with a home. And that was because I got married while I was at university, and we had a child on the way. And I was linked to that was the fact that through the sociology that I was doing at university, I became more and more tuned into the problem around young offenders and delinquency, and saw this job in a brand new probation hostel in just outside Windsor, wanting to recruit a deputy warden. And it provided a flat, and when we were appointed, we actually lived in the same building with all the young men who were there. There were sort of 21 of them. So we had a flat which was on the same landing as all the young men's bedrooms.
So you got a job as a young man, newly married, new child, roof over your head, but
Yeah.
you stayed in this. You didn't go off to become an astronaut or an airline pilot or a rock musician.
No, I mean, I think I recognized, one of the things which this work throws up are the many layers of reasons of why you do it. And I've given you obviously a very superficial practical reason, but you become more self-aware and realize that there are things about your own life which you're probably, in a sense, wanting to work at or work through by doing this kind of work. And also, it was a very exciting thing for me to be part of a brand new hostel. I mean, I was brand new to the work. It was a brand new hostel. So we were literally spending time together, figuring out how we were going to run this hostel and what we were going to do in it.
Okay.
That was exciting. And I was fortunate enough also for the people who managed the hostel to realize they didn't know very much. And they sent me on courses, which were at the Tavistock Clinic, which introduced me to sort of psychodynamic thinking as well, which was a great bonus.
You used one of the rules of this is that you don't use stuff that I don't understand. So tell me what psychodynamic thinking is, please.
Well, it kind of it links to psychoanalysis and an understanding about the unconscious and how what happens to us early in our lives can influence us later when we are adults. And it also links to reflecting and thinking about what's going on, why is it happening now, so that when you are confronted, for example, with difficult behavior from young people, you don't just get into thinking about how best to manage it and quieten it down. You're also looking at what's going on underneath, and also recognizing your own feelings that are being evoked by this behavior and trying to figure out what belongs to me, what belongs to the other person. I mean, that's a pretty rough and ready explanation, but I hope it conveys the idea that it's really getting below the surface and thinking about what's going underneath.
And we talk about more of that when we're on the front line of the childcare, what we're going to do. But just give us a picture. Then you've told us how 1969 you were sent on these courses. You became very interested in what you were doing. How would somebody young like yourself joining now? What would they come up? How would it be like compared to you in 1969?
Well, I suppose one of the things that I was fortunate with at that time was that there was full employment in the country. And so as a new young graduate, it wasn't completely ridiculous that I should apply for this job. I mean, I think people sort of looking for people to come into the work. Uh, there was a kind of need, a real need there. Plus the fact that, again, it was really not a popular choice for people who graduate to sort of get into residential childcare. Um,
And
and
sorry, and we're told, anybody that reads the papers here, there's no money for this, there's no money for that, social care, childcare, it's all in a complete mess. That wasn't the sort of national psychology at the time in '69, was it?
I'm trying to think back to the psychology of that time, but it didn't seem to be quite. I mean, there wasn't the sort of emphasis on austerity that we've heard of for so many years now.
Right.
Um,
Yes.
and I think one of the problems that young people would face now is that a vicious circle of needing experience to gain experience. And I mean, I had no experience directly of the work, and I went, and I was appointed straight into actually quite a responsible job when I look back. I mean, I'm amazed I had the cheek to even apply. Um, but but now, I mean, when I was at the Cotswold Community, we used to have a volunteers scheme to enable uh, graduates to come in and volunteer to gain some of that experience within which they could then apply for jobs in the future. And that was
Yeah.
kind of one way of overcoming that problem.
Much better structured and less gloom, I think, in the '60s. It's when we all had a pound in our pocket or whatever it was that we were told. And I want to move on to the therapeutic childcare that we're talking about, but I just want to get it right in my mind and our audience's mind, I hope, is that when you're talking about childcare, are there two separate things we're talking about here? One is a special needs child, which could have attention deficit, could be autistic, that sort of thing. And that's something they're born with. And there's a child that is traumatized because of a bad home situation or a bad experience. Are we talking about both those now, or are we just talking about the latter?
Well, my experience is primarily with the latter, with those children that I would describe as being severely emotionally deprived from a very, very early age. And then on top of that, having probably layers of traumatic experiences and abuse through their childhood. Um, I think when I went to work for the fostering agency at ISP, um, there was a broader range, and there were some of our foster carers who could work with children with more complex needs, and they could be on the autistic spectrum or and so on. But yeah, primarily, I think it's the latter group that I would.
So that's the focus. I just want to make sure the focus of our discussion. And can you categorize, because I did ask you to categorize, but psychodynamic thinking now, what is therapeutic childcare exactly?
Yeah, well, that's a. There are probably almost as many definitions as you can imagine, really. Um, but I'll start off by saying what I think it isn't. Um, and that is, I've come across organizations that have just employed a therapist for a few hours a week to see one or two children, and then they've described what they're doing as therapeutic childcare. And I don't think that is what I mean. What I mean by it is where you have a definite aim to through the way you're looking after the children throughout the day, all the different ways of looking after children in the course of the day, from waking up in the morning, meal times, going to school, transitions, bedtime, meal times, so on and so forth. You're thinking about that, all those activities from the point of view of how to manage those therapeutically, how to develop the emotional growth in the child over a period of time through those activities. And it does mean that you have to have a focused, you have to You have to have a focused task that this is what you're doing, rather than just hoping for the best. Having said that, again, if I can refer briefly to some foster carers, I was quite impressed by some of the foster carers I met who, without knowing it, without calling it this, clearly were caring in a therapeutic way. But it wasn't planned. They weren't consciously doing it. And I suppose what I'm talking about is the conscious effort by a team of people, or a group of foster carers, to care therapeutically, to develop emotional growth in the children.
I was going to say, it's emotional growth, emotional space, as opposed to just putting food on the table, making sure that they're warm or showered, or they go to school or whatever. This is, I think we said with psychodynamic thinking, this is deeper than this, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It is deeper than that. Having said that, though, I mean, a well-run home which looks after children well will have some therapeutic benefits. It's not the kind of, it's not that therapeutic care isn't taking place at all, but it's not focused, and it's not the main purpose of what's going on there.
Right. Let's go a little deeper into this, and amongst our audience, there will be, I hope there are those that are in this field. We want to hear from you as to and question John, challenge him, call him out if you think he's wrong. Let's go on, but we really want to get deeply into this. I'm going to give you on your very good website. I'm going to put to you some of the phrases that you use and ask you to explain them to us in the thing. One of them was emotional unintegration. What is that, and what good or harm does it do?
Well, when I went to the Cotswold Community, this is when I came across the concept of emotional unintegration. And Barbara Dockar-Drysdale, who's the consultant psychotherapist at the Cotswold Community, who already was extremely well known for her work in starting up and setting up the Mulberry Bush School. She was very strongly influenced by the work of Donald Winnicott, and one of the aspects of Winnicott's work was the understanding that very small children, as babies, gradually become emotionally integrated probably during the first 12 to 18 months of life, providing that primary care is good enough. Doesn't have to be perfect, but good enough. And from that period of being integrated, the child is then able to deal with separations and gaps, and it doesn't have to go on being perfect. They've already got some kind of inner cohesion to draw on. But prior to that, if there are traumas and really big disastrous interruptions, then a child can remain stuck in that sort of emotionally unintegrated state. And on the surface, things can look okay, but I liken it a bit to a house with no foundations, or very wonky foundations, so that as soon as there's a tremor and something that will shock, the house can crumble and fall. And a bit like an emotionally unintegrated child, it seems to me, is a bit like that they can, in some situations, seem to be sort of coping all right, but as soon as there's a frustration or something that gets in the way, there can be it can all fall apart, and there can be a really big explosion.
You gave a sort of age range there of an infant, really, 18 months or something. Is there an age range for the level of bad things happening, of trauma, as you go up, and then there's a particular time that you can handle it, or are we all susceptible to it?
I mean, I would think we're all susceptible. I mean, trauma is shocking and impinging and really affects you throughout your life. I think but obviously, if you've had a pretty good start in life, and you've got some emotional strength, internal emotional strength, then there's a chance that you will be able to recover from that, and or know how to seek, or even know how to seek help to get help with overcoming the trauma. But again, I think we're talking about young people or children who um, profoundly mistrust. I've got very good reason for mistrusting,
And
and therefore they're doubly depriving themselves. Not only did they miss out early on in their life, but they're missing out in the here and now because they're not actually trusting what's available.
give us a reason to mistrust. I can't get into the mind of an 18-month-old, but give us a reason to mistrust.
Well, if you think about what a baby experiences in the first 12 to 18 months of life, if the care is good enough, it's that general repetition of wanting to be held warmly, to when feeling frustrated to get a response, to be fed, to be comforted. This happens sort of thousands and thousands of times, and gradually the picture will build up in that infant's mind that things are okay. Then it's not going to be disastrous. I mean, they're not thinking in words, are they? Of course they're not. They don't have those words to think like that. But that's the sort of feeling sense that's there. And if you haven't got that, if you actually, instead of getting the comfort you need when you really need it during those first few months, you get a shock to the system, you get hit, you get shoved, you're inflicted with pain, then that just gives you a very sense of basic mistrust about anything around you. So you don't believe, I mean, as you get older, you still do not believe what people are saying when they're saying, we care about you, we're going to look after you, you're okay with us. I mean, that child isn't going to believe that for 1 minute. And all their
Okay.
experience is to the opposite of that.
And this is the building of a child, say up to what, sort of 5, 6. Does anything change, or are those parameters still in place throughout? The trust parameters, shall we call them?
Well, I suppose the big change is when the child can begin to sort of speak and verbalize how they're feeling, because what all the emotional damage that I've been talking about is at a pre-verbal stage.
Right. Okay.
So it can't easily be put into words. It can only be expressed often in bodily feelings, which is
Yeah.
why some of the feelings come out as big explosions or self-harm.
You talk about something else, unpredictability. Explain that.
Yeah, well, the opposite of that, reliability, I suppose, is a
Mhm.
crucial bit. I
Mhm.
think one of I mean, if you're working with children, young people who have basic mistrust, a key ingredient is that we, the carers, have to be trustworthy. And as a starting point.
Mhm.
So, and one of the things, again, I think that Winnicott actually defined in one of his papers, I think he actually called it residential carers therapy. And he came out with 5 things. Don't ask me what all those 5 things are, because I won't remember. But one of them that sticks in my mind is reliability. That you're there when you say you are. You do the things you say you're going to do. If you promise something, you fulfill it. And that sense of reliability is something that will build up over time. It's not a quick fix. It's one of those things that will probably take many months before the penny starts to drop for the young person. Actually, this person might actually mean what they're saying.
So in the case of care home or something, that means keeping the same care team in place.
As much as you possibly can to provide as much continuity as is possible. I mean, that isn't always possible, but again, there are ways of working with that with children so that you're actually upfront with what's going on and what who's there and why they might be
Mm.
leaving and why they and so on and so forth. I mean, when I started out at the Cotswold Community, we worked extremely long hours, um, ridiculously long hours, I have to say. Um, and then gradually, as the years went by, there was more and more pressure for those hours to come down and reduce. And now, of course, working shifts is the norm. And that's something which while I was at the Cotswold Community, I didn't have to face either doing that or managing that. And I'm full of admiration for, say, a place like the Mulberry Bush School today, which has found a way of caring therapeutically, but also accepting that staff are going to work on shifts. Um, One of the attractions for me about actually working with a fostering organisation was seeing the continuity of care that a family can provide. Uh,
Yes.
there are lots of disadvantages about what a family can do compared to within a residential team, but I was I was I was taken with the fact that you got this 24/7 care in a family setting, which
Right.
couldn't be replicated in the same way in a residential setting.
You've touched on something there that I want to come to later is you're working on shifts as opposed to working round the clock or however much was needed. But I want to touch you with another phrase that you use called hiding the true self. How do you detect? I mean, is it a good thing? How do you detect a child doing that, and what does it mean?
Well, I should say that we all do it to a certain degree. No one is being completely real and true to their self all the time. I mean, we've all got defenses that we employ and use. I'm probably doing it now. You're doing it now. I mean, we're not being we're not saying truly how we feel all the time. It would be unworkable. It would. I mean, the world would be quite mad if we all did that. But there's a big difference between um, having functioning defenses, which are necessary for ordinary life. But if you've been really emotionally damaged and hurt at a very early age, so that you're hiding completely your real self from everybody else at all the time, and and instead you have this false self persona, which on the surface might seem quite adequate in most situations, but really is quite brittle, and under certain circumstances will crack. And
Explain it a child, or explain what are the circumstances that we would call traumatic or bad, and how you can detect that they are bringing down this defense, and then how they get out of that and how much they get out of it. Can you give us a picture of that?
well, I can think of I can think of an example of where false self was really sort of necessary. And that, I mean, I was reading a novel recently uh, about sort of British India, where British people living in India sent their children to boarding school at a very early age in England, probably at the age of about 6 or 7.
Mhm.
And it was an horrendous, often a horrendous experience, and the child had to find a way of surviving and not and basically hiding their real feelings of abandonment and complete devastation. Um, and they they would undoubtedly grow up with that false self veneer of trying to cope and having a sort of superficial way of coping, and and on the surface probably look as though they've got great social skills as well. Um,
Mhm.
but there'd be something, and often these people could have great periods of depression underneath, when
Yes.
when their real self was really crying out to be attended to. And um,
And this is through the generations, is it? Because now we are in a generation where you're meant to be able to express what you feel, but and then we've moved out of the stiff upper lip thing, which is I think is what you're describing there. So would such a person ever know their true self?
um, yes, probably at the point of breakdown. I mean, this is one of those peculiar paradoxes where, and where I said before that it's where depression can be a good thing. I mean, most of our society is kind of averse to depression and would go to great lengths to try and avoid it, or when faced with it, would try and jolly people out of it, rather than actually acknowledge that it's a time when you're kind of your defenses are down, and you're if the help's there at the right time, I mean, there's an opportunity for real emotional growth. So I think you can know when when your real self wants to emerge, but it's not.
Right.
But it's a kind of pretty tough journey, actually.
And in the area that we're specifically talking about here, in the sort of childcare environment, can you spot a child who's hiding their true self, who's sort of putting that lid down in order to survive? And if you do spot it, or when you spot it, what do you do about it?
Well, Barbara Dockar-Drysdale, in her consultancy work to us at the Cotswold Community, identified a number of levels of emotional unintegration. One of the most unintegrated children she would describe as emotionally frozen.
Okay.
She also described another layer as archipelago children, and then also false self children and caretaker self. The false self children probably had some good experience before it was completely broken off. And the a way of working with them, which we had, was that over a period of time, they would allow themselves to be looked after, because their false self was basically putting on an air of, I don't need anybody, I'm fine, thanks very much. I don't know what I'm doing here, really. But gradually, when when a relationship started to develop with perhaps a particular staff member, there would be an acknowledgement that you know they needed some help, they needed some looking after, and that was a really good sign. That's what you're aiming for.
And that brings into what we were discussing before, the psychodynamic thinking, reliability, predictability, and that will then gradually allow them to come out of these shells.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, very much so, yes.
Another point or another phrase you had, in non-moralistic attitude. The idea of evil does not have a place in therapy. What do you mean by that?
Um, well, it is really raises the fact, again, it comes back to psychodynamic thinking, really, that people can do really bad things, but that's different from actually labeling somebody as completely evil. And I mean, we tend to do that. I mean, the media can do this quite a bit, or people's reaction to something terrible can lead to that. Um, but we're kind of interested in what's going on for that person. Why is this happening? Why are they doing it? Why now? And rather than giving it labels like bad, or you know, it's kind of, behavior is a bit like the kind of weather. I mean, you kind of, you we want to describe weather as good or bad, sunny, rainy, and so on. Give it a label, and rather than, I think it was Billy Connolly who said, "There's the thing about weather, you just got to wear the right clothing," and rather than getting into sort of labeling it or categorizing it. And I suppose it's the same thing about behavior. Tendency is to categorize it, and a psychodynamic thinking requires you to actually get beneath that.
Right. So labor, even not evil, even if a child is called insubordinate or naughty or something like that, that then categorizes it, and
Yeah,
possibly or
obviously.
troublesome, or that sort of thing is. Um, if a child is then coming out of the shell, for want of another word, has had a pretty dreadful beginning of life, coming out of the, then they see a sense of themselves, and you've got a thing called nuisance value. What
Yeah.
is the nuisance value, and what does it mean?
Well, I suppose the children that used to worry me most were those that were, you knew that they'd had some really terrible experiences, and in the way that we already referred to, um, but they were quiet. They'd kind of, like they were hibernating. Um, but once they started to begin to trust, and things started to begin to happen and grow a bit, they would also become more difficult. And that's the tricky bit, because the one's instinct is to say, well, they should this should start to get easier, but it doesn't actually. Um, Winnicott wrote some very interesting stuff about the antisocial tendency, whereby when someone begins to feel hopeful, they begin to become aware of what they need. But sometimes instead of just asking for it in the okay way, they have to take it, they have to grab it. And it might be stealing. So even stealing can be, although it's a crime and can lead someone obviously getting into trouble, it can also be a hopeful sign. We, again, if I can briefly refer to sort of foster carers, I worked with foster carers who would be often puzzled by why is this child getting up in the middle of the night and stealing food when we've actually, it's there available. They don't need to steal it. Why are they doing that? And it's that kind of wish to take something for yourself. You know you need it. You're going to have it, and that's a first stage before you can really begin to explore that with your carer and begin to know how to ask for it and to
We
share.
need to give it, rather than asking for it, knowing that it's there, they steal it because it shows that they can do something, that they have the power. It shows their relevancy, that sort of thing.
Yeah,
Is that what we're
and
talking about?
because it still shows some mistrust that you don't believe, you want to have your own supply of food. You hoard it, you keep it, you keep it in your own mood, you hide it away. And that gives you a bit of security that you've got your own, you've got your own resources here.
And then when something like that happens, what do the professionals do? You can't encourage, or do do you encourage stealing because it says, yes, it's getting you out of your shell, it's making you into a fuller person? Do you discipline the stealing? I mean, what do you do?
Well, again, what really used to impress me by some foster carers that they would think about it rather than just react to it. And again, they would have a team of people they could talk to. They could have therapists that they could talk this over with and would come up with some probably interesting ideas and obviously talk to the child about the fact they know what was going on. But rather than you feel the need to steal with it, steal this food, I'll tell you what, we're going to make this box here for you, and you tell us what you'd like in it, and then every time you feel the need for it, you can come and help yourself to it. That's fine, but it'll be like a special thing for them in a special place. So not just sort of diving into the fridge and just sort of grabbing something, but something that they knew was for them, and it was in a, that would be kind of one possible solution, which the child would hopefully respond to positively, but also see that this was very much about their need being met as an individual. Um,
Mhm. Um, there's a so I've got a pretty good picture now of the child, of bringing the child out, of stopping it falling through the gaps, as we've discussed. But in the care industry, the selection of the staff, that support that you were talking about earlier, how you would work 24/7, and then there was the shift thing. Just encapsulate some of that for us, will you?
you mean in terms of choosing staff? So
Well, yes. I mean, you know, in the newspapers today, there's staff shortages, but you have to have somebody who, talking on this, understands the psychodynamic thinking, and then there's the shifts, which puts the purse strings onto it. So,
well, I would say that um, if you're clear about your therapeutic task as a residential place or a fostering organisation or wherever, if you're clear about that, that's a starting point, because you want people who are interested in that work, who are actually applying to do it consciously because that's what you say you're going to do. That's and that's kind of stage one.
mhm.
But also, I think you need time to get to know the person and sort of, an hour's interview isn't going to do it. Um,
Right.
and again, at the Cotswold community, we used to arrange for people to come and visit and come and stay for 2 or 3 days if they could, because we wanted to get to know them in situations, but it was also vitally important that they knew the nature of the work and weren't seduced by stuff they saw on the surface that they thought looked really interesting and attractive. And of course, the work is interesting and can be attractive, but it's also really tough. And it's going to ask things of yourself which probably you hadn't even thought you were going to be asked. Because one of the things that we know about this work is that if the children can give us a master class in anything, it's how to press our buttons, and know exactly and find out all our weak spots very, very quickly. This is again part of the survival skill they've learned. And so we know that doing this work, we're going to have all our weaknesses exposed, and we're going to feel wretched some of the time. So really got to have people who can come in and you feel are resilient enough to be able to cope with that and come through it and learn through it as well. Because I think working psychodynamically, you can't leave yourself out of it. You're going to grow and develop as well. Because one thing that you're kind of demonstrating to the children you're looking after is that we're all on a journey. We're all at different points along a continuum. Um, I'm not going to give you the impression that I've made it. I'm still learning. I'm still trying to figure things out, and we're going to do it together to a certain extent.
Yeah. We've got we've got some questions now, which I'll come to in a second. But the the environment at the moment, in social care and childcare, and that against the need that you just so graphically and vividly explained of the type of carer that was needed or the type of person that needed, do they fit, or have we got a mismatch of the shifts and the budgets and the
Well,
whatever
I'd
it
be
is?
interested to hear from the participants because I mean I've now been retired for 10 years, so I mean I'm probably not. I probably can't give you an absolutely bang up to date picture of that. Um, but I mean, it is different. I think now in a number of ways. But I'll be really interested to hear anybody else's
Well,
observation.
thank you, John. Let's have your thoughts on that, on whether the what John is describing is needed in the professional environment is actually available in the way that the care is structured here. We have a question from P. Does P have a name? Let me see. Uh, Phil, what do you think are the most important lessons that our current shift-based residential services can learn from the work of therapeutic communities with a psychodynamic focus, such as the Cotswold Community? What are the most important lessons?
Well, I think you've got to find. I mean, it seems to me if I was faced with them now, I'd be thinking of ways to provide different ways of providing continuity. And one of the things that Barbara Dockar-Drysdale used as a tool, um, which I think would probably be helpful for shifts in getting to know a child, having what she called 24-hour programs, whereby as a whole team you got together to look at uh, and focus on a particular child and think about how they manage the day. What's For example, what's the best way of waking this child up in the morning so he or she gets up in a good frame of mind? And what's a bad way of doing it? I mean, some children like a softly approach, some like a hale and hearty approach first thing in the morning. And if a team on a shift don't know that, what then that can start the day off in a pretty bad way for a child. So a 24-hour program, for example, could be looking at all the different parts of the day which which collectively people kind of figure out, and then you're really asking whoever's working to know that and to approach the children, the particular child, in a way that works, that makes sense for them.
So you need a solid handover note between the night shift and the day shift.
Yeah, but something, yeah, well, yeah, I guess it is a sort of handover process, yes,
Yes.
but actively throughout the whole day, and
Yeah.
that's that would be one thing that occurs to me. Um,
Right. And Christine McFadden, how can psychodynamic thinking support staff resilience and emotional well-being in challenge environments? How can it support in challenging environments?
well, again, I think. I think a sense of, well, there are a number of things that occur to me, but one of them is a sense of community amongst the staff. And again, I saw this with a good example that comes to my mind right now is with foster carers, because being a foster carer with a very emotionally disturbed child can be a very lonely, isolating business.
Okay.
But one of the things that we did at ISP was create a community of foster carers, if you like, a hub around a particular centre. And that centre would have its own, had its own staff team, which included therapists, as well as educational specialists, social workers, and so on. But the carers themselves would come together every week and share things and think about things together. And again, there might be on the surface, somebody might come in kind of in a very kind of negative frame of mind, but gradually by really expressing that and hearing what other people are doing, and someone might hear that someone else is going through something similar, but might have a different take on it. Begin to examine, well, maybe you know, maybe it's not quite as this child's not been quite as bloody minded with me as it first seems. There may be another reason for this.
So
My,
this is almost the care professional and the true self discussion that we're having, that they reveal more of themselves and then get more ideas from others.
yeah, I think you have to be prepared to do that because, uh, I mean, another example that comes to mind was when our teams met with Mrs. Dockar-Drysdale, which we did every week. Sometimes as a team, we'd feel absolutely beaten up by a particular child in a group. I mean, not physically beaten up, or there could be a bit of that, but just emotionally and completely drained. And the team dynamic would go into a meeting thinking, we've got to get rid of this child. The only way we're going to survive, and this group's going to survive, if we can get rid of this child. Mrs. Dockar-Drysdale wouldn't play that game. I can tell you that for a start. And she would get us to think about, hold on. She would unpick the various things that we were saying about what was going wrong with this child. And invariably, she would get us to think about the fact that this child is acting out because they're communicating their feelings in another way. And she would probably trace it back to the fact that as adults, we were missing something. We were not picking up on cues earlier on about what was going on. And that would be quite a tough thing to have to come to face, that instead of her colluding with us and this need to just kick this child out to survive, she was actually getting us to take ownership of probably some of the things that we'd missed and actually could have prevented getting to the kind of really dire state that they seemed in.
And I think you mentioned before, when we were talking before the show, you gave a very vivid outline of a troublesome or a naughty child, whatever, in a group, and how they react to the group.
Yeah, I think it's very easy for it seems to me that in a group for one child to become, if you like, the scapegoat, to carry all the hostility and anger for everybody. And that's a really quite a dangerous time, because the temptation is for that, for the wish to get rid of that child. But if if you've ever done that, and I have to say that I have seen that happen, I'm sorry to say, it doesn't cure the problem, because there's also there's the next child lined out ready to sort of take on that role.
Oh, that's that's always one of those.
You,
So the old thing from my childhood, where you're told to go and stand in the corner, i.e., expelling you from the group and putting you into exile, that doesn't work.
but it doesn't work in the context we're talking about. It might have a salutary effect in a secondary school with children who are fairly well together, and they might just sort of feel a bit shocked by that happening and think a bit more about it. But certainly doesn't kind of work with the kind of children that we're trying to.
Stephen Craig, interesting question. Having worked in a therapeutic community in 18 years at Care Visions, my view is that the smaller homes with more deliberate relational work is more therapeutic. However, there does appear to be a mourning of the institution, the larger group home model. Which model do you think is more effective in providing deliberate therapeutic developmental care?
Oh, that's a big
Great
question.
question, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that I have to say that worries me about the trends over the last kind of couple of decades is the way that some homes have got smaller and smaller and smaller. And in fact, you wouldn't describe them as a group at all. They're actually kind of like got one child in them, or two at the most. And I I think that's coming close to a kind of family model, but not even providing the benefits of a family with caring parents, but actually again providing shifts of people with a family model. I mean, I witnessed, certainly there were larger group therapeutic communities like Pepper Harrow that existed in the 70s and early 80s, where they worked with maybe 30 plus young people and did an awful lot of work in a large group setting.
Well
And
told.
Melvin Rose, who was the director at the time, who wrote a lot about this, and there were BBC programs made about it as well, um, did a great job. The problem was that, when my understanding perspective on this is that you have to have quite a lot of inner, what I would call jargon, ego strength to work in a large group, to make a large group work for you. The more emotionally damaged and unintegrated the child, the smaller the group needs to be. So at the Cotswold Community, although we worked with 40 young people as a whole, they actually lived in 4 smaller groups. Now, by today's standards, groups of 9 or 10 would probably be described as a large group. Um, but at that time, that was quite small, and that was manageable. Um,
Mhm.
and it also meant, with the size of the staff team, individual needs for the children could also be met.
Mm.
Um, but I do worry about trying to provide group care in groups less than about 4 or 5. I'm not. I think you're into a sort of quite different dynamic then.
Yeah, so,
Uh,
so this was this backlash against these huge institutions where, and then they said, right, let's get everything down to less than 6 or something like that. Just give us an idea of what the Cotswold demographic is, for want of a better word, against somebody that's, say, working in Glasgow, or somebody that's working, in Kensington or whatever it is. Just give us an idea of who the that sort of demographic you're working with.
do what in terms of a description of the children? Is that?
No, descriptions of the community, of the environment. Because when we think of Cotswolds here, we just think of these pretty cottages and second homes and all that kind of stuff. So I wanted you to bring us down to earth.
Yeah. Well, you have to remember that the Cotswold Community previously, in a previous life, had been an approved school. In Scotland, they would have been called List D schools, I think, and there was an original farm there. There were the original Cotswold stone farm buildings, which were very attractive. They were in a kind of small, kind of quadrangle of farm buildings. They'd been converted into sort of dwelling places, uh, prior to the approved school, actually, by German Christians who'd formed a Bruderhof community. But I won't go down that route. It was too much of a
Okay.
tangent.
Okay.
But then in the early 40s, uh, the approved school started, and they built some pretty, I have to say, some pretty ugly buildings, very block buildings, not at all attractive. But it was based on a farm. It was based on a 350-acre farm. So that's obviously very different from an inner
And they
city.
brought in children from the local community, did they?
No, children were sent uh, to the approved school at that time after being assessed, having been given a sentence by magistrates, uh,
Yeah.
an approved school order.
Mhm.
Um, when we in 1967, when the Cotswold community as a therapeutic community started, um, we started to take in young people from all over the country. Um, After they'd been assessed as needing very intensive therapeutic care. So there were very few really local children that came to the Cotswold community.
Okay.
They would be probably mainly inner city children, quite a lot from the London boroughs, but also Birmingham and all points of the compass, really.
Yeah. And do you still keep in touch with some of them that you met all those years ago? Have they become star footballers or airline tycoons, or what's happened to them?
We've had all of those, yeah. We've had one of the reasons for me having my website is that it enables people to actually write into me, and that's always interesting to sort of get emails coming in from the middle-aged or people not much younger than me who experience the place and want to make contact. Um, and it's very interesting because I get some quite pleasant surprises. I mean, I can think of one or two young people who I would say we didn't really succeed that well with. We didn't do as much as we could have. And later they might write in, maybe 30 or 40 years later, and they write quite fondly about their experiences and things that they learned, which really come as quite a shock because I'd never imagined that they would have that take on it.
And what was this might be the wrong phrase. What was the reoffending rate? What was your success rate in getting people to into good jobs and good lives?
Well, yeah, when at the time when the approved schools were coming to an end, there was a crude sort of measure, really, which was, did the young people who left the approved school offend in the following 2 years?
Mm.
And the success rate was very low. I mean, it was, something like only about 30%, between 20 and 30% managed to avoid reoffending in the following 2 years. Um, we managed to sort of turn that on its head. I mean, it's not a particularly good statistic, I have to say, but we managed to turn that statistic on its head, so that by far the great majority didn't offend. But having said that, I can think of boys who are at the Cotswold community who we worked pretty well with, but they still had a bit of a tough time after they left. They kind of did hit a critical patch. And so they would probably be being regarded as a failure, but I know that they came out the other side and, really made a go of their lives. So in the long run, it was a success. So I think that statistic is only very partially useful.
It's good. And of course, your job there was, I mean, reoffending might be one benchmark, but your job there was to enable them to move through life, whether they, I mean, this might be the wrong thing to say, but whether they ended up in prison or not was one element of it.
Yeah, a real goal was to break the cycle of deprivation. Because
Right.
if
Yes.
if you looked at any of their histories, you would see generations often
Yeah.
where the emotional damage was passed on from one generation to the next.
Right.
And if because we were looking for real change, we weren't looking for superficial conformity. We
Mm.
were looking for something that would make a real difference inside, so that wherever that young person went, they were carrying it with them. It wasn't something they were just leaving behind at the gates of the place when
Yeah.
they left. Um, it so really being able to sort of break that cycle of deprivation. So again, it was fantastic when we had get-togethers to see these middle-aged men come and talk about how they were looking after their own children. And they would often say, I remember those stories that you read to me at bedtime. I'm doing the same with my kids, things like that. And there'd be simple things but really heartening to hear that they'd taken on board some of the things that happened.
Okay. David King has got a question that I've been savoring here because it's going to need a translation on somebody's part. Hi, John. What are your thoughts on caring through the lens of polyvagal theory, if that's pronounced right, in understanding the child's defenses, survival behaviors, and also the caregiver understanding their own defenses and triggers? What is the polyvagal theory? And that's the question.
Well, I'm going to have to admit my ignorance of that theory. Uh,
David, you're going to have to come back. I shouldn't have left you so late. But the question is okay. Let's say understanding the child's defenses and survival potential, understanding the caregiver's defenses and triggers. Let's talk about that whilst David gets back to us, or I Google it, or somebody Googles it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I suppose in a way, all that I've been saying is that the young person who's been really severely emotionally damaged from a very early age. I mean, their whole being is in defending themselves, expecting the worst to happen the whole time,
Mhm.
and never believing that there was much good could happen. And even when presented with actually something that's obviously a good thing, can't believe it, and will have to try and provoke the environment into doing the worst. Because rather than, if you're a child who's got these thoughts, rather than wait for the worst to happen, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to make it happen. I want it to happen now. I'm not going to believe that this is going to get any better. So if I'm going to be kicked out of here, I'm going to make this happen right now.
So they stay in control of something that's going to be bad.
In
They
a very
preempt the
negative way.
badness. Yes.
In a very negative way, they're trying to keep control of the situation in the belief that it's dangerous not to. Um, and that's an extraordinarily difficult thing to, because there's no quick fix to that. You've got to sort of try and withstand that being. I mean, we had a phrase, being tested to destruction, and it felt like a young person who's been through that is going to really take you to the very edge of what you can cope with, and that's why you need the support actually of colleagues and consultants, wherever you can get it, to help you survive that. Because
So is it you say testing to destruction, or is it testing their perceptions of trust and reliability, those two issues that we discussed right at the beginning, and pushing you to make sure that you don't break and don't become unreliable?
yeah, well, yes, it is. That's one side of the coin that you just described. But the other side of the coin is, as a carer, as an adult in that situation, you're feeling as though you are being tested to destruction, and all your wish to sort of say and do the right thing is being pulled apart at the seams. That's what it can feel like.
And this is where you need the support of your colleagues on the front line. You have something here, I'm not sure if we did cover it, about one carer saying to the other, well, he's all right with me, I don't know why you've got problems with him. And I exposing the carer for the behavior as opposed to the child not supporting.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that again I've seen and experienced myself, where within a staff team, one person in the team is regarded as a bad person by a child or a group of children, and that person on the receiving end of that can be judged by other members of the staff team. They could take the view, well, must be something wrong with you. You must be lacking in skill to be on the receiving end of this, rather than seeing that this is part of the, for reasons, there might be quite irrational reasons, the child or the children see in you something negative that they have to attack. If you can get the support of your colleagues, rather than seeing that as a bad thing, to cope with that, you might get to the bottom of what it is that's going on for that child.
Yeah, no, and of course the colleagues as a team should be seen by the child as reliable and
As reliable,
trustworthy, as opposed to one being trustworthy and one not.
yeah, and reliably supporting the person who's on the receiving end of all that negativity.
Who
That they're not
that's
just falling for it, because it's very easy if you're seen as the good person by a child and there's somebody else being seen as the bad person, you can bask in the glory of that if you like, and think, wow, I must be great.
yeah.
It's a great feeling. Rather than actually, you ought to, ideally, you ought to be a bit suspicious of why I'm being seen this way, rather than someone getting all the rubbish.
Yeah, that's I've just noticed we are out of time. That hour fled through. My learning curve went way up. Richard Cross is making a book plug, a good historical research study focusing on T.C. Rose M. 1997, Transforming Hate to Love, an outcome study of the Peeper Harrow treatment process for adolescents by Routledge. Do you know this book? Sure.
I do.
You do? Okay.
Yeah, I do, and I knew Melvin Rose pretty well, um, and it's a very interesting read, and I think I'm glad it's been mentioned. Um, I think I also had a relationship with Pepper Harrow after Melvin Rose ceased to be the director, and one of the things which came back to the point about how large groups and smaller groups, they increasingly were referred young people who were more emotionally damaged and found it more and more difficult to cope in the large group. And in the end, I think this was a factor which led to the closure of Pepper Harrow. Um,
Okay.
but in the period of time that Melvin Rose is writing, it's a very exciting read and very interesting read. Um, but there were young people there who I would say had some ego strength and could actually make good use of the large group in time.
John, thank you very much indeed. I could definitely go on with this conversation, but we are over time, which in my trade is not a good thing. But thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you for coming in with those comments and questions. And we are particularly grateful to you, John Whitwell, for navigating us through this sort of field of this balance. I don't know how to sum it up. Give us a
Do you mind if I say something just at the end?
please, please.
It's just that there's lots of things that I haven't covered or managed to cover. Or if any of you wish to pose a question to me after this or have any further thoughts, you can get an email through to me via my website, and you can also find plenty of things on the website that might also be of interest to you. And it's if you just put John Whitwell in the sort of Google search, it will guide you towards the website, and there is a comment section where you can click on that and send me an email, and I'd be happy to respond.
Yes, and I can vouch for that because I just Google you and it comes up straight away. So, John, thank you again. You did absolutely great conversation. And until then, from all of us at Care Visions, stay safe and goodbye.